Evelyn Nesbit's story is a tapestry of beauty, intrigue, and tragedy, wrapped in the dazzling yet turbulent Gilded Age. Her name became synonymous with elegance, but behind her captivating looks lay a life shaped by struggles, resilience, and ultimately, one of the most infamous scandals of the early 20th century. From the moment she was born, her path was anything but ordinary. Evelyn came into the world on Christmas Day in 1884, and from her very first breath, she was destined to be noticed. Even the local newspaper couldn't resist commenting on her striking beauty, declaring her the most beautiful baby ever born in the county. That statement, as frivolous as it may sound, set the tone for a life where her appearance would become both her greatest asset and her heaviest burden. While Evelyn's ethereal features earned admiration from all, it was her father who saw beyond the surface, nurturing her creativity and filling her world with music, dance, and whimsical tales. Evelyn adored her father, who was the anchor of her childhood and her guide to a world of imagination. To her, he was more than just a parent. He was her protector and her biggest supporter. Tragically, this idyllic bond was shattered when she was just 10 years old. Her father passed away suddenly at the young age of 40, leaving the Nesbit family not only heartbroken, but also financially destitute. This marked the beginning of a life filled with uncertainty and hardship for Evelyn and her family. With their safety net gone, the Nesbits were thrust into a life of struggle. Evelyn's mother did everything she could to provide for her children, but the weight of her late husband's debts forced the family into an almost nomadic existence. They moved from place to place, relying on the kindness of friends and family, just to survive. At one point, Evelyn's mother attempted to run a boarding house, but the venture was short-lived. It wasn't until they moved to Philadelphia that Evelyn's life took a dramatic turn. While strolling through her neighborhood one day, Evelyn unknowingly altered the course of her life. An artist spotted her and was so struck by her ethereal beauty that she begged Evelyn to pose for a portrait. That single encounter opened doors that would lead Evelyn to unimaginable fame. Her move to New York City marked the beginning of a meteoric rise as one of the most sought-after models of her time. Evelyn's face became synonymous with elegance, selling everything from luxury goods to magazines. She even graced the covers of Vanity Fair and Harper's Bazaar, cementing her status as the darling of the art and advertising world. But as dazzling as her ascent was, it carried the seeds of a darker fate. Modeling quickly lost its luster for Evelyn. Craving more excitement and a chance to fulfill the dreams nurtured in her childhood, she turned to the theater. The lights of Broadway called to her, and she made her debut as a Spanish maiden in a lively production. Though it was a modest role, Evelyn's performance didn't go unnoticed. In the crowd sat Stanford White, a powerful and celebrated architect with a dark, obsessive streak. White became enthralled with Evelyn, attending the play again and again, some say over 40 times, just to catch a glimpse of her. What began as admiration quickly spiraled into a chilling obsession. White, a man known for both his architectural genius and his hidden vices, orchestrated a meeting with Evelyn. He used his connections with one of her fellow chorus girls to arrange a secret rendezvous at one of his private apartments. From the outside, these spaces seemed inconspicuous, but inside they were luxurious and opulent, reflecting White's immense wealth and penchant for indulgence. However, Evelyn was about to discover that the glamour was only a facade for something far more sinister. As the saying goes, all that glitters is not gold. When Evelyn first stepped into Stanford White's opulent apartment, it was like stepping into a dream. Ornate furnishings, gleaming chandeliers, and lavish details surrounded her, a stark contrast to the modest life she had known. Yet, despite the allure, Evelyn saw through the glamour. She admired the surroundings, but felt no such admiration for White himself. His infamous red velvet swing, meant to amuse and impress, did nothing to sway her. In Evelyn's own words, White was appalling and terribly old. She was only 16, barely more than a child, while White was a weathered 48. His charm, if one could call it that, was lost on her. Yet White wasn't one to give up easily. His fascination with Evelyn knew no bounds, and he sought to shape her into his vision of perfection. For White, Evelyn's beauty was nearly unparalleled, but there was one flaw he couldn't ignore: her teeth. Determined to mold her into his ideal, he arranged for her to visit a top dentist to correct what he saw as imperfections, covering the substantial costs himself. This wasn't just an act of generosity, it was an attempt to exert control. White's immense wealth meant Evelyn could enjoy privileges she had never imagined. However, with each gift came a price, a silent expectation that couldn't be ignored. White's influence over Evelyn grew as he showered her with luxuries and opportunities. He moved her and her family into a luxurious apartment, funded her brother's education, and provided Evelyn with piano lessons, books, and extravagant gifts. Through his connections, he introduced her to society's elite, ensuring her rise as the iconic Gibson girl, a symbol of beauty and sophistication. But these so-called favors were laced with darker intentions. White's obsessive generosity wasn't selfless. It was a calculated effort to bind Evelyn to him. He made her his protégée, his muse, and, in his mind, his possession. For Evelyn, White appeared to be a benefactor, almost a father figure, offering a path to success she couldn't have achieved alone. But White had far more sinister motives. Over time, he cultivated trust not only with Evelyn, but with her mother as well. His seemingly endless generosity won over Mrs. Nesbit, who began to see White as a guardian for her daughter. So when White suggested that Mrs. Nesbit visit friends in Pittsburgh and leave Evelyn in his care, it seemed like a reasonable idea. Yet this decision would prove disastrous. What followed was a moment that would haunt Evelyn for the rest of her life. Left alone with White, she found herself at the mercy of a man who had meticulously crafted every detail to gain her trust. The opulence of his world, the gifts, the promises, they were all part of a web designed to entrap her. Evelyn's life, once filled with hope and ambition, would never be the same. Evelyn Nesbit's life was a collision of glamour and darkness, a tale that exposed the chilling underbelly of power and control during the glittering Gilded Age. Amid the spotlight of her career as a model and Broadway performer, Evelyn's days were a whirlwind of activity, leaving her vulnerable to the manipulations of a man who saw her not as a person but as an object of obsession. During this exhausting period, Stanford White made his move, luring Evelyn into his world with promises of respite. He invited her to what he called a party at the iconic Madison Square Garden, a place he himself had designed, a testament to his wealth and influence. But when Evelyn arrived, expecting lively conversation and laughter, she was met with eerie silence. The grand venue was empty, save for White himself. A chill hung in the air, an unspoken tension that made the opulence around her feel oppressive. White greeted her with feigned disappointment, saying, "Isn't it too bad all the others have turned us down?" The statement, casual on the surface, was the first indication that Evelyn was walking into a trap. White handed her a glass of champagne, urging her to relax. One glass turned into another, and soon Evelyn felt her defenses slipping away under the influence of alcohol. Isolated and vulnerable, she was at White's mercy. The evening, which had started with promises of relief from her demanding life, became a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. White then led Evelyn up a secret staircase, his demeanor eerily composed, as he guided her to a room she had never seen before. The space was small, yet filled with expensive antiques and rich drapery, an almost theatrical display of wealth. But this wasn't the final destination. Hidden behind the ornate hangings was another room, one that seemed pulled from the pages of a dark fairy tale. A four-poster canopy bed dominated the space, surrounded by mirrors that reflected every angle. Above, the ceiling twinkled with color-changing lights, an almost hypnotic display of beauty masking sinister intentions. What should have been enchanting was instead suffocating, a glitzy prison where Evelyn's fate was sealed. The next morning, Evelyn awoke to a nightmare she couldn't fully comprehend. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrors surrounding the bed, her exposed body a stark contrast to the fragments of memory she struggled to piece together. She was lying next to Stanford White, and the horror of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. With no clear recollection of the night before, Evelyn let out a scream that echoed through the oppressive silence. White, calm and composed, delivered his final chilling blow. She belonged to him now. After the harrowing events with Stanford White, Evelyn was left shattered. White assured her that nothing improper had occurred between them, framing his actions as normal and even expected. He wielded his power with chilling precision, telling her, "A girl must never talk," a command that left her silenced and trapped. Evelyn, a young girl facing one of the most influential men of her time, felt helpless and betrayed. Fearful of what might happen if she spoke out, she chose to bury the pain deep within her, at least for now. Despite her trauma, Evelyn found herself tethered to White in ways that were difficult to escape. He had lifted her family from poverty, secured her career, and provided them with a lifestyle they could have never imagined. For a time, Evelyn clung to the hope that perhaps White's intense interest in her meant something more. Maybe, she thought, he would leave his wife and marry her. A dream of a happy ending danced in her mind, but it was only an illusion. White had no intention of making Evelyn his bride. To him, she was a possession, not a partner. Amid her entanglement with White, Evelyn's beauty and charm continued to captivate audiences. Cast in the Broadway production The Wild Rose, she became the star attraction, enchanting everyone who saw her. Among her many admirers was a peculiar man named Mr. Monroe. Unlike the others, Monroe's fascination went beyond admiration. It bordered on fixation. Over the course of a year, he attended nearly every performance, always seated in the front row, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. While the theater applauded her talent, Monroe plotted a way to turn his obsession into reality. Taking a page from Stanford White's playbook, Monroe used manipulation to get closer to Evelyn. He enlisted one of her fellow cast members to invite her to lunch, setting the stage for their first encounter. But when Evelyn arrived, she found herself face to face with Monroe, who immediately dropped to his knees in an unsettling display. Grasping the hem of her skirt, he declared passionately, "You are the most beautiful girl in New York." Far from flattered, Evelyn was horrified by his excessive behavior. His grand declarations felt less like admiration and more like desperation. Evelyn's rejection only seemed to fuel Monroe's obsession. His behavior grew increasingly erratic, his desperation more pronounced. Like White before him, Monroe saw Evelyn not as a person, but as an object to be claimed. For Evelyn, these encounters were yet another reminder that her beauty, while celebrated by the world, often placed her in peril. It was during a pre-show dinner when Evelyn found herself seated beside a man who introduced himself as Mr. Monroe. As the evening unfolded, she discovered the chance seating arrangement was anything but. Monroe revealed his true identity: Harry Kendall Thaw, a coal and railroad heir from Pittsburgh, armed with a staggering $40 million fortune. For most women, such a confession might have been dazzling, but not for Evelyn. She had long grown accustomed to wealthy men showering her with attention and gifts, and to her, Thaw was just another in a long line of suitors. His fortune didn't impress her, nor did his persistence. What Evelyn couldn't see was the darkness that lurked beneath Thaw's polished exterior. Desperate to gain acceptance among New York's elite, Thaw was a man shaped by insecurity and a need to dominate. He was peculiar and reckless, with little regard for the vast fortune at his disposal. But far more troubling was his fixation on Broadway actresses and their purity, a preoccupation that revealed an unhinged mind. While he appeared to be nothing more than an eccentric suitor on the surface, Thaw's obsessions and instability made him a ticking time bomb. Evelyn, unaware of his dangerous tendencies, didn't recognize the threat she faced. Thaw's life was rife with sinister behavior that painted a chilling picture of his character. He had a history of luring young women to his home under the guise of being an acting coach. What followed were horrifying acts of cruelty: scalding, whipping, and tying up his victims in a twisted attempt to redeem them for their perceived sins. In his delusional mind, Thaw believed he was a savior. The only thing protecting him from legal repercussions was his mother's immense wealth, which repeatedly shielded him from accountability. Evelyn's indifference to Thaw initially seemed like it might spare her from his fixation, but Thaw wasn't one to give up easily. His obsession with Evelyn only intensified. Thaw bombarded her with gifts, from 24 pairs of silk stockings to a Steinway grand piano, but Evelyn returned them all. When he proposed, she declined without hesitation. Her heart still belonged to Stanford White, despite the complicated and toxic relationship they shared. Evelyn clung to the hope that White might still offer her some semblance of love, even though he continued to court other young actresses. The realization that White's affections were divided left Evelyn hurt and determined to win back his attention. In a classic act of defiance, she resolved to make him jealous, unwittingly walking deeper into Thaw's dangerous web. The opportunity to stoke White's jealousy presented itself at a lavish party he hosted, where Evelyn met John Barrymore, a young and charming actor destined to become one of the greatest names in theater and film. Barrymore's wit and youthful energy were exactly what Evelyn needed to catch White's attention, and it worked like a charm. By 1902, Evelyn and Barrymore were the talk of the town, their romance seemingly inseparable. Watching Evelyn in the arms of another man ignited White's jealousy to a fever pitch, and he vowed to put an end to their budding relationship. Teaming up with Evelyn's mother, White hatched a plan to separate the lovers permanently. Their scheme involved sending Evelyn to a prestigious boarding school far away from Barrymore's influence. But before she departed, Barrymore made a last-ditch effort to secure her love. In a bold and dramatic gesture, he proposed to her right in front of both her mother and White. The room must have been electric with anticipation, but Evelyn's response left everyone stunned. She said no. Barrymore had served his purpose, and with a cold practicality, Evelyn walked away, leaving him heartbroken. For Evelyn, it was clear. Her plan to provoke White's jealousy had worked, and Barrymore was no longer needed. At boarding school, Evelyn's life took another dramatic turn when she faced a sudden medical crisis. She required an emergency appendectomy, and her mother, panicked and desperate, couldn't reach White for help. Instead, she turned to an old admirer with a dark history, Harry Kendall Thaw. Thaw, ever eager to insert himself into Evelyn's life, stepped in without hesitation. He arranged for one of the best doctors money could buy to perform the surgery, ensuring Evelyn's survival. But Thaw's generosity wasn't without strings attached. After she recovered, he made an offer that seemed impossible to refuse: a luxurious trip through Europe, designed to help Evelyn relax and recover from her ordeal. The trip, however, was far from the glamorous escape Evelyn might have imagined. From the outset, tension simmered between her and her mother. Evelyn soon discovered that her paychecks were being squandered on her mother's personal indulgences, creating a rift that grew impossible to ignore. The arguments escalated, and eventually her mother decided to return to America, leaving Evelyn alone with Thaw. What should have been a chance for Evelyn to enjoy freedom and adventure turned into a nightmare waiting to unfold. Alone with a man as volatile and controlling as Thaw, Evelyn found herself in a situation that could only spell disaster. While traveling through Paris, Evelyn found herself cornered by Thaw, who demanded to know the truth about her past with Stanford White. His demeanor was intense, almost unhinged, as he interrogated her about what White had done to her. Evelyn, likely weary of carrying the burden of silence, revealed the horrifying truth. She recounted the night White had lured her to the secret room of mirrors, the night she woke with no memory of what had happened, but knew that her innocence had been stolen. Sharing this deeply personal trauma was an act of trust, or perhaps desperation. Yet Thaw's reaction proved to be more disturbing than she could have anticipated. Upon hearing her story, Thaw erupted into uncontrollable hysterics. He wept, shouted, and seemed overtaken by rage at White's actions. At first, his outburst appeared to be driven by genuine sorrow and anger on Evelyn's behalf. But as the night went on, Thaw's questions grew darker, more probing. He demanded every detail of the horrific event, forcing Evelyn to relive the trauma in vivid detail. What began as concern soon morphed into an unhealthy fixation, as Thaw's obsession with White began to eclipse his supposed compassion for Evelyn. The pair continued their travels across Europe, yet Thaw's preoccupation with White never wavered. Wherever they went, White was the uninvited ghost in every conversation. When they arrived in Germany, their lodgings took on an eerie air, a Gothic castle that seemed like the setting of a grim fairy tale. One night, in a place that should have been a sanctuary, Evelyn's world turned into a waking nightmare. Thaw dismissed the servants, insisting they be left alone. The isolation, the dark halls, the oppressive atmosphere, all of it was a prelude to something unimaginable. In the dead of night, Evelyn awoke to find Thaw standing over her. His face twisted with madness, he held a whip in his hand. What followed was an act of unspeakable cruelty. Thaw attacked her with a terrifying ferocity, tearing her nightgown and striking her with the whip. He raved about her need to atone for her sins and subjected her to a brutal assault, claiming control over her in the most violent way imaginable. Evelyn was left bruised and broken, her body bearing the physical evidence of his madness. The next morning, as if nothing had happened, Thaw returned to his usual demeanor, pretending the night's horrors were a figment of the past. When Evelyn, desperate and in pain, asked to see a doctor, Thaw arranged for her to meet a professional who, likely under his influence, ignored her injuries and dismissed her pleas for help. Trapped and terrified, Evelyn knew she had to escape Thaw's clutches, but the power he held over her felt insurmountable. By the time she returned to Paris, she had already endured enough to break anyone's spirit. Yet her troubles were far from over. A stroke of luck came when she encountered a friend of Stanford White's, who helped her escape Harry Kendall Thaw's terrifying grip and return to New York. But her relief was short-lived. Back home, Evelyn found herself more isolated than ever. Her mother refused to see her, and White once her protector, was now too preoccupied to pay her any attention. At just 17, Evelyn feared she had already lost her allure to White, a man notoriously drawn to younger women. Meanwhile, Thaw refused to let go. For 2 relentless years, he attempted to atone for his brutality with grandiose gestures. He bombarded Evelyn with letters promising he would change if she became his wife. He sent her extravagant bouquets of flowers as apologies, and when she refused to respond, he enlisted friends to plead his case on his behalf. His persistence was obsessive, unyielding, and suffocating. Evelyn rejected him time and again, but Thaw would not be deterred. His determination wore her down, and despite every instinct screaming otherwise, she eventually gave in. On April 5, 1905, Evelyn married Harry Thaw in a ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. She wore black, a haunting symbol of her resignation to a fate she couldn't escape. In the early days of their marriage, Evelyn clung to a fragile hope that Thaw had truly changed. Perhaps his promises of reform weren't just empty words, but as the days turned into weeks, it became painfully clear that she had placed her trust in a man incapable of redemption. Thaw's obsession with Stanford White remained as fierce as ever, and Evelyn found herself trapped in the middle of a deranged rivalry. Thaw couldn't let go of White's past transgressions and became consumed with vengeance. He hired investigators to follow White's every move, determined to find something that would tarnish his rival's reputation or worse. Not to be outdone, White retaliated by having Thaw followed as well. It was a twisted, high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with Evelyn caught in the crossfire. The feud spiraled into chaos, culminating in a confrontation so shocking that it would go down in history as one of the most infamous scandals of the Gilded Age. For Harry Kendall Thaw, marrying Evelyn wasn't just about possessing her. It was a calculated move to strike at the heart of his greatest rival, Stanford White. Thaw's hatred for White ran deeper than Evelyn's personal trauma. White's towering influence in New York society was a constant reminder of Thaw's own rejection by the city's elite. Taking Evelyn, someone White had cherished and controlled, was Thaw's ultimate power play. She wasn't just his wife, she was a tool to dismantle White's gilded empire. Thaw's obsession with vengeance consumed their marriage, and Evelyn quickly found herself losing what little agency she had left. In one particularly vindictive act, Thaw targeted even the smallest remnants of White's influence on Evelyn. Upon learning that White had once paid for Evelyn's dental work to enhance her already stunning beauty, Thaw demanded she return to the dentist, not for further improvements, but to have her teeth ruined. It was a cruel gesture meant to erase White's contributions and assert Thaw's control. He even made Evelyn a spy in his campaign against White, insisting she notify him the moment she spotted White in public. To Thaw, White wasn't a man but a monster, and he forced Evelyn to adopt his language by calling White the Beast. After enduring Thaw's obsession and control for over a year, Evelyn longed for an escape, even if it was just a temporary reprieve. When Thaw announced a grand trip to Europe, she allowed herself to hope for a fresh start, a brief glimpse of the life she had once dreamed of. The plan seemed extravagant, a stop in New York for dinner and a show before embarking on a luxurious voyage across the Atlantic. But Thaw's true intentions lay hidden beneath the surface. The play they had tickets to see was Mamselle Champagne, being performed at none other than Madison Square Garden, the very place where Stanford White reigned supreme. If Evelyn thought this was a coincidence, she would soon discover otherwise. The night of the play, Evelyn couldn't ignore her husband's erratic behavior. Thaw drank heavily, his hands trembling as he fidgeted beneath a long black overcoat that seemed out of place for the evening's occasion. Evelyn's anxiety deepened when she scanned the audience. Relieved at first to see that White wasn't in his usual seat, she dreaded the idea of an encounter between the two men, knowing her husband's temper would make the situation volatile. But as the elevator doors opened, her relief turned to dread. Stanford White entered the theater, his confident stride betraying no awareness of the storm brewing around him. Evelyn's heart sank. She knew this wasn't an ordinary night. White, oblivious to the malice in the air, was walking straight into Thaw's meticulously laid trap. The night that began with promises of glamour and escape was about to become the prelude to one of the most infamous events in American history. Evelyn, caught between two men and their destructive obsessions, could only watch as the tragedy unfolded, powerless to stop it. On a summer night in 1906, as the play unfolded, Evelyn begged Thaw to leave the theater before White could see them. She hoped to avoid a confrontation that her husband's erratic behavior had foreshadowed. But when Evelyn reached the elevator, Thaw was nowhere to be found. She turned, her heart sinking, as she spotted him striding purposefully toward White. In what felt like a slow-motion nightmare, she saw Thaw pull a pistol from his coat and, without hesitation, fire 3 point-blank shots. The first bullet struck White in the mouth, the second pierced his eye, and the third hit his shoulder. The powerful architect and socialite collapsed instantly, his life snuffed out in front of a stunned audience. Amid the chaos, Thaw stood over his victim, a twisted smile of triumph on his face. He calmly handed over the gun and declared, "I did it because he ruined my wife." The theater erupted into screams, and Evelyn, paralyzed with shock, realized her life would never be the same. Stanford White's death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it became a public spectacle that consumed the headlines and drew the eyes of the world. Evelyn found herself thrust into the spotlight as the central figure in the trial that followed. The media devoured every detail of the love triangle, painting Evelyn as both a tragic heroine and a willing accomplice. Thaw's legal team built their defense around a plea of temporary insanity, a condition they called brainstorm. They argued that Thaw had acted out of an honorable, albeit unhinged desire to defend his wife's honor. Evelyn was left with no choice but to take the stand, both in the first trial and its sensational retrial. Her testimony, laden with deeply personal and scandalous revelations, became a national obsession. In an era when discussions of sexual assault and intimate relationships were taboo, Evelyn's public recounting of her trauma was both groundbreaking and soul-crushing. For the first time, the secret of what White had done to her, the betrayal, the night in the room of mirrors, was exposed to the world. The humiliation and mental toll were immense, but Evelyn had no other options. Her livelihood depended entirely on the Thaw family's wealth, and she was trapped in a narrative she couldn't escape. The second trial revealed even more about Thaw's violent and erratic tendencies, leaving the insanity plea as his only viable defense. The jury found him not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was sentenced to life at the Mattawan State Hospital for the criminally insane. For Evelyn, it seemed like the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. Even from the confines of the asylum, Thaw retained his grip on her life. His wealth and influence ensured that Evelyn remained tethered to him, her every move shadowed by the legacy of his obsession. Even from the confines of Mattawan State Hospital, Thaw maintained a sinister grip on Evelyn's life. He had her followed, her every move reported back to him in obsessive detail. In 1910, Evelyn gave birth to her son, Russell William Thaw, claiming he was conceived during a conjugal visit with Harry. But Harry vehemently denied paternity, a claim he upheld for the rest of his life. Despite the sacrifices Evelyn had made for him, her dignity, her reputation. She realized marrying into the Thaw family had been an irreversible error. Compounding Evelyn's suffering was the disdain of Thaw's overbearing mother, who viewed Evelyn as unworthy of her family's name. She controlled the purse strings with an iron grip, doling out a miserly allowance that left Evelyn scraping by. The once glamorous woman who had been the toast of New York found herself begging her incarcerated husband for additional funds just to keep a roof over her head. This demeaning routine pushed Evelyn to her breaking point, and she knew she couldn't rely on the Thaws any longer. Determined to regain control of her life, Evelyn took a bold step. She turned against Thaw, testifying against him during his sanity hearings. Her testimony shocked society, but was part of a calculated plan to provoke Thaw into granting her freedom. The gambit worked. Thaw, enraged by her betrayal, filed for divorce. In 1915, Evelyn was finally free, but her freedom came with challenges. After her divorce, Evelyn married Jack Clifford, a charismatic dancer. Together they crafted a stage act, and for a time it seemed she might reclaim the happiness she had long been denied. But Evelyn's notorious past cast a long shadow over her new marriage. Clifford struggled with being known as Mr. Evelyn Nesbit, and the weight of her infamous name proved too much for him. Their union dissolved in 1918, leaving Evelyn once again alone to fend for herself. The 1920s brought Evelyn some of her darkest moments. She opened a tea room in Manhattan, but financial pressures and personal demons followed her. Alcohol and morphine became her companions, and when she was fired from a dancing job in 1926, despair overtook her. In a moment of hopelessness, Evelyn attempted to end her life by drinking disinfectant. Thankfully, she survived, but it was clear she needed a change. In the years that followed, Evelyn clawed her way back to stability. By the 1930s, she was performing in burlesque shows, and during the World War II, she found a new purpose. Moving to Los Angeles, she left behind the ghosts of New York and began a new chapter as an artist. Evelyn took up sculpting and found fulfillment as an instructor at the Grant Beach School of Arts and Crafts, proving that reinvention was always possible no matter the odds. Evelyn's life came full circle in the 1950s when she served as a consultant for the film The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing, which dramatized the most scandalous chapters of her life, including Stanford White's murder. Her face, once the epitome of Gilded Age beauty, remains iconic, even if her name and history are less widely known. Evelyn Nesbit's life was a complex mix of beauty, ambition, heartbreak, and resilience. Though her story is filled with glamour and scandal, it also serves as a poignant reminder of how society's obsessions with image and wealth can overshadow humanity. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the life of the original Gibson girl. If you found this story captivating, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales from history. Until next time, take care and stay curious.